Well, hey folks, this is John with Ozarks Backroads coming to you from Ozarks Backroads World Headquarters here. We're out in the garage. We're back on some projects with the new Suzuki V-Strom 650. And today we're going to be working on the suspension a little bit. We're going to see if we can raise the bike up about an inch or so. And we're going to start with the rear links. I've got some links that will raise the back end up about an inch. We'll start with those. And this is what they look like. They're just slightly shorter than the original links that are in it. So we'll put these on, we'll do some measurements, and then we'll change them and see how much change we've got. And then we'll move to the front end and see if we can raise, get all we can out of the front forks on the front end and see how much we can lift the bike. Stick around. Before I change these links, I'm gonna go ahead and do some measuring here just so I can see how much of an effect this is going to have. The lowest point on the bike is the center stand right here. So I'm going to measure it to the floor here. 4.5, 5.5, 6.5, so that's 7 inches. Right now in the stock configuration, the bike's just sitting on its own. There's nothing holding it up. So there's 7 inches, and then I'm going to go back here to the very back and just measure for reference to the tip of the fender, and we'll see how much it goes up. For about 21 1/8 inches there. So I'll record those two measurements, and then we'll change these links and see how much difference it makes. Well, I got the nuts off the backs, the ends of these bolts for these links, and I've got the bike up on a screw lift here. And I've set it to where the rear tire is just touching the deck with just a very little bit of pressure on the deck here. So I'm trying to get a neutral feel for where these bolts will come out, and I think I found it here. So I should be able to pull these out and release these links like so. We'll compare the links here. You can kind of see the difference. The offset there, it's not much, but when you have an arm this long back to the wheel, that little bit of difference winds up being about an inch. So we'll put these in. As far as I can tell, there's no inside or outside to these. They look the same on both sides. I'll get my nut started back here so my link doesn't fall off. It's not going to reach up here anymore. It's too short. So we're going to have to raise the bike up and let the rear wheel drop down a little bit before these are going to reach. So we'll give it a little bit of a lift here, and I'll just kind of eyeball when this lines up. That looks about right. Let's see if that'll start. All right, we got our links in. All right, well, I got my links tightened up. I raised the bike up and I dropped the center stand all the way down. So the bike's sitting on the center stand now. There's nothing else holding it up. I used to have about an inch underneath the tire, the back tire to the deck there when it was on the center stand. And now it's rubbing on it's just right on the ground, touching on the deck. So it's dropped it about an inch on the rear tire. And we'll go ahead and set it back down on the suspension and do our two measurements and see what those measure here. We got the bike sitting back down on the deck here on the suspension. We're going to do our measurements that we made before and see how much difference it makes. The first measurement was the low point here on the center stand. We're going to measure that is 7.5 inches. The previous measurement was 7 inches, so we've picked up a 1/2 inch here on this center stand. And then back here we measured to the tip of the rear fender. We are at 22 1/8. And our previous measurement was 21 1/8 back there. So we picked up a full inch in the frame back here, and we picked up a 1/2 inch here. Now, in order to get a full inch here on the center stand, we're going to have to raise the front the same amount. We need to get an inch out of the front, and then we'll get our full inch will show up here. So we'll move to the front, see if we can get an inch out of those. Okay, we're back on the front of the bike here. The bike's just sitting on the suspension. I've got the front wheel chalked up, but it's just sitting here. I've got a tie wrapped around this cylinder. Fork tube. I'm going to slide it down against the seal here, and then I'm going to sit on the bike, just my weight on the bike in normal riding position, and I want to see how much sag I get in the suspension, how much I've got to work with here, if I can get an inch out of this or not. So we'll check that right now, and then I'm going to sit on the bike. Just normal weight here. Get back off here. So that's how much suspension I've got to work with, and that is not much. It's about 1.5 inches of total sag there with me on the bike. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here and cut new spacers. This bike doesn't have adjustable preload up here on top of the tubes. The earlier models did. When they went to this latest generation, for some reason, they did away with the preload adjusters. So the only way that I can adjust the preload here is to just cut a longer spacer. So I'm going to go in here and we'll pull the caps off of the top of the tubes, remove the spacers, and we'll cut some longer spacers. We're up on top of the bike here. I've got the bike lifted, the front of the bike's lifted, the front wheel is all the way down, the suspension's relaxed as far as it'll go. I went ahead and removed the caps and set the handlebar up out of the way here, just so I could have room to work here over these caps. And I'm gonna remove this first cap. Now I went ahead and loosened up these pinch bolts here on the upper triple tree. I don't really think it's necessary, but I did. Either way, I think it's fine. So I'm going to remove these caps, and there'll be a little bit of pressure when that jumps up. The spring's probably spacer will probably come out about an inch or so from spring pressure, so I'm going to try to be ready for that. There it is. That's not too bad. We got our cap off, and I'm going to go ahead and remove the spacer. So this is our spacer that was in there, so we need to cut one about 1 inch longer and replace it, and I put the cap back in. I've got some 1 inch PVC. This is schedule 40 pipe, but it's plenty heavy, and it happens to be the exact same diameter here as the sleeve that was in it, the spacer that was in the tube. They're both the same external diameter, so that'll work really good. And I went ahead and marked it, and I've decided that 1 inch might be a little bit greedy since I've only got 1.5 inches of total travel to play with there on the top of the stroke. I went ahead and I'm only going to cut it 3/4 of an inch longer. So I'm going to leave 3/4 and take 3/4. That'll be 1.5 inches. Get lined up on our mark. Get this pipe all square so we get a nice straight cut. That looks pretty good. All right. That's not bad at all. All right, that looks about right. Try to get this straight as I can. All right. We did pretty good. I think that's close enough for the girls I hang around with. All right, we'll drop this in the tube and see how big of a battle it's going to be to get this cap back on there with an extra 3/4 of an inch of spring travel there to compress. This could be fun. Well, it's time to put the cap back on. We've got our new spacer dropped down in here, and you can see it's quite a bit higher than what the original spacer came out at. So this could take a little effort here to get this on. I'm gonna have to get up on the bike so I can get some downforce and leverage to hold it down. All right. There she started. We'll run that down. And those caps don't need to be very tight. You saw that it's got a rubber O-ring that actually seals in the tube, so that's probably all it needs right there. We're over on the other side now. We'll see if we can get this cap back on. If we can pull this off, we should be home free on this project. This is definitely the hardest part, getting that compressed down on there. See what we can do here. All right, we got her started. We're going to check the ride height now and see what we did on our suspension, how much travel we've got. Right now I've got nothing under the bike. It's just sitting on the suspension. I'm going to get on it and let my weight push it down. We had 1.5 inches before, and we're at 3/4 of an inch. So we put in a 3/4 inch spacer, and we went from 1.5 inches down to 3/4. So that's what it should have done. That's about all I can get out of that suspension on the front without changing the tubes to a longer tube, which is an option. We can do that. I know a place that builds those. They'll make them whatever length you want. So if I think I need more height in the front in the future, I can always get a 1 inch over length set of tubes, fork tubes for it would be an option. I got the bike back up on the center stand. It's just sitting on the center stand, and that's it. And before I did the front end with just the links on the back, the tire was just barely touching the ground. Now it's dragging pretty hard. So I'm gonna have to probably throw a 1x underneath that center stand in order to, oil my chain or adjust it or whatever. So that's kind of a bummer, and I'm pretty sure the kickstand is going to be a real issue. It was about too short anyhow. I'll have to think about that. I'm going to take it off the center stand now and set it back down, then we'll measure the ride height and see how much we gained in clearance underneath the bike. We got her back on the ground, back on the suspension now. We're going to check our measurements that we made before we started. So we'll check our center stand. That was the lowest point. Okay, that is 7 3/4 inches. And when we started, it was at 7 inches. So I've raised the bottom of the bike 3/4 of an inch. That's 22 inches. So that's up 7/8. This is up 3/4. All right, folks, well, that about wraps up our suspension lift video here on the 2019 V-Strom 650. We got an extra inch out of the back and 3/4 out of the front. And we got about 3/4 overall underneath the bike. So that's probably worth doing. For those of you who are pretty keen-eyed, you might have noticed I got a new set of the Dunlop Trail Max Mission tires on the bike now. I put those on the other day. Those are about my favorite 50/50 dual sport type tire. I run them on the Tiger and I absolutely love them, so I can't wait to get out and get on some dirt roads with this and some trails and see how they do. I invite you to come back and see me. We're going to take a ride tomorrow, and we're going to check out all this work we've done on the V-Strom. Until I catch up with you again next time, you all take care of yourselves. We'll catch you later.